Hello all you Nightmare nerds, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Nightmare Revisited. It's hard not to take notice of the way horror filmmaker Mike Flanagan has been dominating the genre for the past several years. From his micro-budget nightmare Absentia to his blockbuster Netflix horror epics, he is certainly a rising star primed to give us all terrors for years to come. Today we tackle what I believe to be his magnum opus, The Haunting of Hill House. Welcome to Nightmare Revisited. Hello, all you Nightmare nerds. Welcome back to another episode of Nightmare Revisited. We have a returning guest host today. We have my buddy, you heard him on the Dexter podcast, Christopher Capitanio. And we also have another special guest today. We have his newly wifed up lady, except not really new because it's been like over a year, but they just had their wedding. So everybody give it up for Dez Capitanio. Clap, 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 clap. Clap for yourselves. So thank you both so much for being on the podcast today. It's been really fun to get some different people's takes on stuff this season. And when Kat told me that Des wanted to come in and give her her input on Hill House because it's one of her favorites, we were really, really excited. I'm really excited to see what we all have to say. So how are we doing on this lovely, lovely Sunday afternoon, everyone?
We're kind of just taking it easy today.
Yes, this is our big thing, but we got other things to do. But we've just been hanging out with the cats, watching some recaps and stuff. Haven't watched Hill House in a little while. It was one of the things, I think when I first moved down, I was like, you have to watch this show. Yeah, it's definitely a show that has stuck with us. So
sure.
Some fun revisiting some things over the last, I forget how long it's been since you asked me, but so we're feeling energized and ready to chat about one of our favorites.
Good. And this is kind of like opposite to me. I'm fresh off of a rewatch. I just finished maybe an hour ago, so the tears are still kind of clogging my eyes. So it's a good thing you guys can't see me. You can only hear me. So as we always do on the Nightmare Network podcast, let's start with the first time you ever guys watched this. What kind of experience did you have? I know it's a bit of a different take because this is a series versus a show. So maybe you could give me kind of your first reactions you had to that first episode, Steven Sees a Ghost, and I guess how you felt going into the rest of the season and how it made you feel approaching this big story that was going to unfold before you.
It was already fleshed out very well. Just over the first episode, like, okay, this is what's happened, but we don't know what's happening in between. So I definitely was interested in where the journey was going, like what kind of journey I was going to be on.
Sure, because you have that kind of dual timeline. They introduce you to that right away, right? And so, what I think is really interesting about the approach to this show right from the get-go, so you're given the end, right? You're giving the end of the first timeline of the the then Hill House versus the now. So you see that last night from Steve's perspective, and that's one of the first things that you see. And I think doing that really opens up an interesting idea because it's like from the present day narrative, you're building up to something like it's going linear in one direction versus the other timeline. You're actually moving kind of backwards, right? Because you get the end, and so you're working piece by piece to get to where that ending is and also get more information to it. So I think that's a really cool way right off the bat to just dig in to that story, and the first episode does a really great job of that.
I don't remember what exactly prompted me to watch it, if it was other people talking about it or if it was like a trailer I'd seen, or maybe even maybe we had talked about it, like, oh, have you heard about this Hill House?
Yeah.
And it makes me think back even to the earlier iterations. It's obviously based on the book The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, which I haven't read and I've been meaning to read ever since watching it. But I was familiar with the 60s, The Haunting film. That was something I remember watching that in grade school, and that kind of being a bit of a big deal.
Yeah.
I think in some ways that was probably the first horror thing that I'd ever watched, I guess quote unquote horror. I don't know if it still counts in that genre, especially with how it's evolved to this day. But I remember being excited about this show, and it's one that I think it does a really good job of grabbing you right from the get-go. I think starting with the Stephen character is our initial protagonist. Obviously, we have numerous protagonists throughout the course of the show. I feel like he's a relatively easily relatable one to start out with.
He's not plagued by these literal ghosts.
Yeah.
Like us, we have no idea what's happening.
In some ways, he's kind of the most normal, or at least seems that way from the first episode. Obviously, we find out more about how the trauma has affected him and stuff. But especially with me, I tend to have the same kind of approach that he did in terms of, when he goes to that woman's house, who claims to be seeing ghosts and stuff. I've always been one to think like, okay, there's some sort of scientific explanation for whatever this stuff is. I don't necessarily count myself among the believers. So I feel like coming in with that and the idea that everything he knows is wrong
Yeah.
is kind of funny. And then, of course, the ending of the episode where Nell, commits suicide, heavy moment. But then also the revelation where he sees her ghost.
Right.
And flips everything on its head.
So for me, I think the first time I saw this, one of the first thoughts that came into my mind was, wow, I can't believe Liam Neeson and Owen Wilson are in the same movie together, and it's taken me this long. Did we watch different things?
No, we clearly
watched the same one. Well, I see Liam Neeson after the events of the haunting actually fled and became a assassin that was really dedicated to his children. So we do this every time. We like to make fake sequels. But no, so the first time I ever saw it, it was ironic. I was actually going through a breakup the first time that I had ever seen Hill House, and it was so good and I was so obsessed with it that I kind of didn't care at the time. I just wanted to get back and we were watching it together, and we were like mid-season, and we had to have this awkward conversation about like breaking up, and I was like, whatever, I just want to go home and finish watching Hill House. So credit to Hill House for being a real staple of everything. But so what I think is really cool is one of the it's kind of well known that one of the approaches to writing these characters was that they wanted to model each one after different levels of different stages of grief, right? So Stephen is denial. Steven's denial, Shirley is anger, Theodora is bargaining, Luke's depression, and Nell is acceptance, right? So they took these characters and they wanted to model them off of these different stages. And I think it's really cool to be introduced to Steven first, because we immediately get that sense of his character, right? Like he is the denier, and it's not even so much that he's denying the existence of ghosts or the supernatural or things like that. He's denying like responsibility to family members and denying all denying marital promises that he made to his wife that we're kind of slowly figuring this out over the course of the show. And I think it's a really great way to start with him, because we haven't reached a point yet where we believe this is supernatural, right? There's still, and I think even watching the show, at least up until the last episode, we could maintain that too. I think there's a level of like, is this really happening with people, or are these families really like products of the environment that they were raised in? Which I think is really cool, but I think the ending really kind of beautifully brings everything together, which we'll get to. But starting with Steven, that denier, because each episode takes this unique perspective where each one is from a specific character's view, right? And we get to learn through that process who they are through that process. Being the denier, we're kind of introduced to the show, and we feel like the rest of the show might be his show, right? And that it's all going to be the story of kind of debunking or trying to get a healthier relationship away from the supernatural. But as the story fans out and progresses, we're giving such a unique scope. And I think that's such a cool thing about the show.
Definitely. And it's, each of the characters representing a stage of grief is, I think, a huge part of why the show resonated with me. At the same time that this show came out, my band, shameless plug in the presence of wolves, was working on an album, a concept album or a series of concept albums, and we were using the 5 stages of grief in order to kind of tell our narrative. And it was something where not only did we have that element mirrored, but also our story contained twins. The twin thing. It's a twin thing.
It's a twin thing, right?
Which is repeatedly mentioned in the show. So I was just like, wow, this is my album kind of come to life here. But yeah, I think the way that they do it, starting with a more grounded character such as Steven, and then with each subsequent character's point of view revealing more and more. And it's the sort of thing I think Steven starts out as a fairly likable character. As you kind of make your way through the series, the least likable of the siblings.
One of my notes for talking is Steve is an asshole. So if you want to jump into why Steven is an asshole right now, we can do that for sure.
I was gonna say, I think like him being an asshole is pretty evident in episode 1. Going in telling this lady like point blank, like I didn't see anything. Like,
oh yeah, for sure. But even still, I think we're at a point where you can tell he's tired, and I feel like we don't know enough about his family at that point to be like, well, maybe Steve. Well, I think we don't know enough to be like, well, maybe Steve's not an asshole. Maybe he's the victim, right? Because what do we know so far? We know that like Nell is blowing up his phone. We know that his brother broke into his apartment and stole all of his stuff, right? Like I think we're given enough information to be like, maybe he's not an asshole. Maybe he is the victim, and I think it's cool to start there and fan out, especially with that last reveal where I love that the episode's called Steven Sees a Ghost, right? And at the end, he finally experienced that thing I don't know if he's been chasing, but that he's been denying for so long, right? And it's such a, and so I love the perspective approach to this, that we're given windows into each person, and it's only when each window's open do we get a full glance of the story.
Also, I'm sure you're a big fan of Stephen as a kind of pseudo Stephen King, not so subtle kind of novice history as a writer, and even literally having the name Stephen.
So one of my notes here is that I don't know if you picked up on this, but this story is so Shining heavy. There are so many different parallels to not necessarily Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, but the book The Shining. We have this parent figure who has some sort of shine or ability, right? That's kind of like slipping into insanity while being into this house. And we have this family dynamic that's fracturing. We have these kids who have supernatural abilities who are suffering from the choices of their parents. We have a dad who's like finding different things and stories inside the house, inside the basements and stuff, different information. And that's kind of what sets Jack Torrance off. And I find these different layers of narrative kind of stuck between the two. And we all know that our boy Mikey Flans is a huge Stephen King nerd. And especially knowing after this, he finally got the green light to make Dr. Sleep, which is another one of my favorite movies. And I'm sure we'll talk about eventually. But I have them returning to Hill House is very much like Danny returning to The Shining. And so I see this almost like not a practice run, because it's definitely its own narrative that like, that serves itself. But I see this as like his preparation to approach that kind of story. And you can tell like The Shining is something he wants, right? Like that like a faithful adaptation is something that he wants to do. And that's why I'm always like, yo, Mike Flanagan, let's get a Haunting of the Overlook Hotel series and just do all of The Shining. That would be cool. Mike Flanagan, if you're listening, I would be more than happy to write that show for you. So you just let me know and I will be here.
I think he's a little busy right now with the I Think You Should Leave adaptation.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I don't know. Have you watched any of that show yet, Mike?
I've some of it, but I know you're pretty obsessed. You and Mason are pretty obsessed, but
so I'm not sure that if he's actually doing it, but he has at least posted, I think, 2 pages of a script adapting the song.
Oh, that's amazing.
Things Came to Life.
Yeah.
The one sketch, and I'm so here for it.
Yeah, and like Luke is Danny Torrance to me, right? Like he's just like he's such and okay, even more of the parallel. Like Luke is Danny Torrance because he's such a like every time we see Luke, we're like, you ever see that meme from it's the meme format for I know you have because all we do is send memes, but the meme format from Brooklyn Nine-Nine where it's the girl holding a dog and it's like I've only known this dog for like 4 minutes, but I would die for this dog. Like, that's how I feel about Luke. Like, I've only known Luke for 4 episodes, but I would die for Luke. He's such a precious little nugget. And you see his arc of, innocence to addict. And that's the same loop that Danny Torrance goes on from The Shining to Dr. Sleep. So I think it's really cool to see this evolution and kind of mirror it on something that I know is an influence for him and yet is still unique to the show.
I don't think I had necessarily picked up on, but I think those are all really good and fairly obvious.
Yeah.
now that we're talking about it.
Yeah, and just Flanagan's, I don't know if it's king worship, but
I don't know, but you get to, with all the Dr. Sleep and Gerald's Game, and you can tell he's a king head. What'd you say?
Scholar at this point.
yeah.
me and him could probably go toe to toe. But something that I think this show is about really at its core that I'd like to jump into is, for me, it's really about each character's relationship with death and how it is kind of having an influence on their lives. And so, for example, there's this great scene in the beginning that kind of resonates throughout the entire show, where Steven is talking to the widower at her house doing this investigation. And like I said, so far what we know of Steve is he seems like the beginning of every found footage movie, right? He's like the disenchanted ghost hunter, where he's like, they could totally make this a found footage version too. Mike, hit me up. I'm totally down to make it. But it feels like each character is struggling with their own perceptions of death within their own lives. And Steve says this thing that's like, death can be a lot of things. Death can be shame, death can be guilt, death can be a memory, and most of all, death could be a wish, right? And so like ghosts. He says ghosts are all these things. And so he has a different perceptual definition of ghosts. And I think what's really cool about this show is that I think there's ghosts in the show that are supernatural and ghosts in the show that aren't supernatural. And I think that we like to attribute everything to the house because it's the haunted house, right? But I think these characters are really struggling with their own ghosts in Steven's terms, not necessarily a supernatural house terms. The best example I can think of is Shirley always sees the guy that she cheated on her husband with following her around, right? He appears as premonitions. And to me, that's not a reflection of the house, and that's not a reflection of something supernatural. I think that's her ghost. And I think that's her memory. That's the memory as a ghost that's haunting her, right? But I do think there's supernatural elements going on. So I think it's kind of a dual definition of ghost that Steven is right about, but it's not exclusive.
Yeah, and I think we kind of see that again in like Blind Manor. Not to jump ahead, but
do it.
With
Make the leap.
Yeah, with I forget her name already. But when the main character is seeing like her fiance's ghost, like that's a guilt.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, he does that a lot, right? And he does it with Midnight Mass too. And we wanted to make this just a Mike Flanagan episode. I wanted to try something new with like just directors, but the more we talked about it, the more we were like, we could do a podcast for every one of these, and like, why limit ourselves? Because we seem to be pretty big fans of what he's doing. But yeah, he does that with Midnight Mass too. With the main character, he keeps seeing these flashes of the girl that he killed in a car accident. I think that's a good theme that he tends to kind of do.
Yeah, but yeah, I find it interesting where this kind of singular event of the house and the death of their mother is really what shapes all 5 of these characters, 6 even if you include the father.
Sure.
In the equation there. But every aspect of their lives, not only kind of what stage of grief they represent, or maybe most indicative of,
yeah.
But even down to their occupations and life choices. You have Steven who's fictionalizing it,
sure,
and
denying it. Yeah,
denying it and doing the kind of investigative sort of thing. You have Shirley, who's literally a mortician.
Right. And I think you get early on that she has she has an anger towards it, right? And which is like, she wants to control that process. She wants to be able to to have a control over it because of how angry it makes her, right?
And I mean, with her, you know, her first experience with it is with the kittens.
Yeah.
And that's something where I could see where she is trying to control that situation, you know, and trying to raise these little kittens. And in her failing, you know, whether her own or the house's influence, all those cats die, and it has a profound impact on her. And then, you know, then her next experience with that is with her mother.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's trying to again control death in a way and kind of make it beautiful.
Exactly. I was about to bring up like the mortician kind of occupation. Like it kind of requires you to pretty up death in a way.
Yeah.
Like I see it as her fighting death in a way, to like, you know, make people look better, like they're more alive. And I think that's something she saw at Olivia's funeral, and I think that's what pushed her.
Sure.
And then you have Theo, who her whole thing is empathy.
Right.
You know, really her supernatural gift, what she can from others, that she can touch people and feel their feelings.
And you know, we attribute, and you know, if we're going by stages of grief, she's kind of identified as bargaining, and I think that comes out with her, you know, with her trade, you know, like her wanting to discuss and reach common ground, better understandings with people, right? So we see these reflections in their occupation.
Yeah, and she does have some elements of those, you know, trying to fill the holes, you know, with kind of partying and sex. But I find it most interesting how she takes the idea of, okay, I've suffered through this trauma. I can use this and learn to help other people with theirs. And that's pretty profound, and I guess a more positive way, you know, whereas you have Stephen's kind of asshole-ish denial, and Shirley's very scientific kind of approach, you know, very black and white, life and death. You know, it's interesting how she's taken on a more kind of a more motherly role, despite not having children.
Right.
You know, in terms of taking care of these kids and helping them to get over their trauma.
You know, and then we come to Luke, who is obviously, he was closest to the action as a kid too, and I think that's kind of something we forget, him and Nell, and I think we kind of forget that because we don't see how close they were to it until the very end, like them being in the room when Abigail was murdered, that them being at ground zero in the Red Room, and I think that being that close is what keeps them so connected to the events. And they deal with it in two different ways, right? One is Luke's, which is through depression, and how he supplements that is through his drug use. And I wish I could just give him so many hugs. Like he needs so many hugs and a puppy. Like that's what I want for Luke. And I want to come back to Nell, because I think the way her acceptance of death itself is something that really lends itself to the ending, and what I think is a really great ending, and it's what brings her full circle into this. But one thing I do want to ask you is something that even through a rewatch I'm still like toiling over in my head all the time, is the house evil or is it not? Because I struggle with this question, and I'm wondering what your approach is.
I don't think it has a moral code.
You don't think it's okay?
But I think it just wants inhabitants. It just wants to feed.
Yeah. Get hungry.
Yeah. So it just preys on whoever's in there, whether that's the groundskeeper people or Crains or.
Kind of feels like Galactus in a way. You know, it's something that it is a force in and of itself, and it's all about survive. It's just trying to survive.
Sure.
So how it survives is kind of something that most people dealing with it would certainly perceive as a sinister method. But yeah, I think it's definitely a more detached sort of thing compared to necessarily an evil entity.
Right.
it certainly could be construed as evil, but I don't know if it is necessarily.
I think we assign evilness to it because it's
of what it represents.
And it's something that's out of control. Like if you there, it's out of your control.
Yeah.
Not to mention these are, it's dealing with characters that over the course of the season we are, falling more in love with, connecting, grief being such a universal experience for folks. That's again a big part of why it's such a relatable series that can resonate with so many people. We are Nell, we are Olivia, we are Steven, we are, is it Hugh? Hugh's the father, right?
Hugh is the dad.
We are all of them. So it's the kind of thing we're rooting for our characters to overcome.
Yeah.
And not only, I think in overcoming the house, they are overcoming grief itself. But yeah, it's tough to kind of be objective when we're so clearly playing favorites with our characters.
That's probably why I struggle with it, because it's a question that I always come back to, like, is the house evil or not? And when I revisit the show, which I love so much, it feels like that question's always left unanswered, and it leaves me a bit of a hole in my perception of it. But I also think that's kind of the point too, because to me that house is death, right? And it's their relationships that they have with it, their relationships they have with their mortality. And I think that's why you have these ghosts that are following Nell and Luke, like literal ghosts that are representative of their own, facing their own mortality at such a young age with the suicide, right? Like we have the bent neck lady following, which is Nell, right? Which is what the saddest thing in the world. We'll have like a whole discussion about what the brutality of episode 5. But it's literally her viewing this mortality throughout her entire life. And I think that's because of leftover grief and trauma from her childhood that wasn't completely processed. So her mortality is always on her mind, and it's always chasing her because she had to witness a murder and the death of her mother at such an early age. And I think through the same thing, that's what Luke is going through. The man in the tall hat that's floating, right? That's an embodiment of his high, literally, like actually floating, being high, being in a spacey area, like following him around throughout his entire life, right? It's the monkey on his back. It's something that it's an incarnation of his own grief and mortality that he has had since a young age. And I think there's also a part where Luke's been trying to kill himself through drugs for a really long time. And there's this scene at the end where they're all in the red room and Luke has died after being injected with the strychnine, with the rat poison. And he wakes up in the red room, and little Nell is telling him to go, but the mom wants him to stay. And she says something like, we've heard you. You've been knocking on that door for so long. You've been knocking the entire time wanting to be let in, and now you're here. And I think that's really a reflection of, like I said, this death relationship that he's been having. Like, he wants to die from it. It's a method of suicide, why he continues to do it. And so for me, that's what this house is, that it's this constant reminder of death and grief that kind of surrounds the entire the entire house. And I'm pretty sure the series starts with Steven with this quote that's like no person could stay sane under the mundane exceptions of reality. And so the house itself is this brick and mortar representation of our realities of death that these kids are living in and constantly reminded of. And so it's through this relationship that they develop their personalities and their flaws, because when we go through the red room, it all kind of comes back to their flaws. It's draining them and eating them of their their fatal flaws. And Steve, we have this, he doesn't want to have children because he's afraid to pass on, right? He's afraid to continue, which is another Jack Torrance mirror, because Jack Torrance is so afraid of giving what he has to his son that he's inevitably does it regardless of whether or not he wants to. And we have Shirley, who's just so mad that she's trying to control this relationship that she has with death to make it perfect, to improve it. And it's just it's a constant reminder of that death that's surrounding this family. And I think that's really the driving point of the show. And we can jump into the end a little bit here, but with Nell, her acceptance of death, which is that final stage, it's what gives her agency over it. It's what's able to help her overcome and help her siblings, right? Come out of their own death grips. Like it's able to help them come out of the red room. I mean, it's why I think there's this really beautiful relationship with death going out that at first is terrifying, but later becomes something different.
So yeah, I just want to know kind of like, did Nell truly accept death for herself, or did she do it to help her family move on
right
with their lives? So
that's a question that I actually have been asking myself during this rewatch, because part of me, it at some point Nell starts to kind of haunt the family too, and you can tell she's giving Luke advice, and she wants to be seen and she wants to be heard, and actually it seems to me that Nell has agency over aspects that are happening in the house. The Two Storms episode, she seems to be the one that's controlling the lights, right? And it's almost like she's forcing her family to interact and to talk to each other. And then when the casket falls, when they're in this kind of huge argument that's happening and the casket falls, it slams, the lights come back on, and they have to come together to pick her up, right? And so it seems like she is kind of behind it. A part of me while I was watching it did feel like, is she sacrificing herself for the good of her family to bring her family together? And the more I watch it, the more I feel, in my personal interpretation, that's something to consider. But I also feel like it comes back to this dual coin nature we have with the house, that is this dual coin nature we have with death. And that I think that death is inevitable and it's scary, and sometimes it seems to be calling us. But there's this other form of it where it's like, it is inevitable, and it's important that the relationships that we have with it, provide us sanity for the time that we're here, right? And I don't think Nell was finding that sanity in it. And so I do think that the house has this malevolent form because death has this malevolent association with it, but it's two-sided. So I do feel like the house has some evil to it. I feel like it's drawing people, it's eating, and it wants to feed. But I also feel like it offers it's not only that, right? There's some optimism and hope and beauty that comes out of this house as well, which is something that is associated with death too. Death can bring closure. It can, we all hope that it can bring something more, a meaning to life, a purpose. And I think that's really where the heart of this show comes. So for me, I did think about if Nell was sacrificing herself for like a family, for, to bring them together. But what I do think is that Nell got caught in a trap, but because of her acceptance of death, it gave her agency over it to be able to help them out of the red room. That was always my personal interpretation of it.
Yeah, I find it interesting how the house plays role of heaven, hell, or purgatory, depending on which character it is. Like literally, when Luke is in the red room and has OD'd at the end, when he wakes up, the room is all bright white. That kind of classy heavenly image. And when you extend past the ending, for characters like the caretakers, the Dudleys, where the mother wants to die on the property so that she can be with her daughter, that's a heavenly sort of thing.
Sure.
Hell is kind of what everybody thinks it is.
Yeah.
I think it's indicative of a lot of our own kind of personal fears of death. We're afraid it's going to be this place, this dark, gloomy place where we're trapped forever, and it's scary and gross. And then you have a character like Hugh, where he kind of sacrifices himself at the end. That's kind of his purgatory.
Yeah. But even still, I think it's a positive purgatory for him.
The red room is literally white when it opens to Nell. Yeah,
which is cool. All right, so we keep kind of dancing around the ending, which I think is normal because the ending is so important to this story, as it typically is. But some stories are about the journey and some are about the ending, and I feel like this one the ending really shines so much light on the journey that they have towards it. So let's just jump right in. I think it's a happy ending. And it's funny because so I made Nicole, my girlfriend, watch the show, and she hates scary things. Two things. Well, she only said one thing, but I'm pretty sure it's two things. Drove her to tell me, like, I don't think I can continue to watch the show. It's giving me panic attacks and stomach aches, like watching a show, which is a testament to, like, this show, at least the first few episodes, way scarier than I remember. Like, it is very intense. And I used to think this, like, it's a family drama wrapped in a supernatural bubble, but it really is, like, terrifying. Some of the scares are really, really well constructed, especially in those first few episodes. But two things she was like, I don't think I can watch it. Number one is, I'm pretty sure, was the amount of structural and water damage that is referenced throughout this entire show. Nicole yeah, Nicole is a homeowner, and she sometimes stares at our ceiling for like hours, just being like, is that a new crack? Is that a foundation? She's afraid to go in the basement because she's afraid she'll find structural or water damage. So, like, when the water comes out of the ceiling in the very first episode and drips on Steve, she's like, oh my God, lady, you got to stop that. That's going to get into your wood. It's going to cause mold. That's water damage. We don't want that. And then she sees the mold in the basement. She's like, this is my nightmare right here. Going into the basement, finding black mold. Are you kidding me? That's like a whole new renovation to your basement. That's thousands of dollars. I could never do that. I'm like, I think you're missing the point a little bit, but also you are correct. This is a homeowner's nightmare. Like, this is a money pit. But the other thing is, she got to episode 3, and episode 3 really is really brutal. It's Theodora's episode, and it's kind of her process with, the father who has been molesting the girl that he's been taking care of. That's one of her clients, and we see this smiley face that's kind of haunting her. Which is another example of ghosts that aren't really ghosts, right? It's this child's being haunted at night, and it's not something paranormal. It's something real in her life. And Nicole said she didn't think she could watch it anymore. And I kept trying to convince her, like, I promise it has a happy ending. And even just watching it, as like tears are strolling down my eyes, I still maintain that it is a happy ending. I'll get into why I think it's a happy ending, but do you guys agree? And how do you see the ending in terms of the rest of the show?
I mean, the last shot, obviously, they're in a bright room. They're all, they're celebrating Luke's sobriety. Right. Which,
Go Luke.
Yeah, exactly. He did not die. But I don't know if it's happy so much as bittersweet. I guess it's happy in that it's this is the story of a family that has overcome grief.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, this is their reality now.
Yeah.
And everything is, the storm is quiet.
Sure.
And, yeah. So in that sense, yes, it's a happy ending. But yeah, definitely more so bittersweet.
All right, what do you think, Cap?
Yeah, bittersweet was the same first word that came to mind for me. The big thing is that we have kind of two separate reunions of family.
Right.
Here. And when we were first introduced to these characters, they're all in separate parts of their lives, all separated. The thing that brings them together is really Nell passing.
Yeah. Sure.
That's the only reason why these characters are together. There's so much animosity there. There's so much just trying to, I think, avoid, the shared trauma. I think it's something where as they get together, that trauma kind of revisits the surface.
Yeah.
And it's really kind of our motivation throughout the whole show. So when we end, it's just the sort of thing where it's not without tragedy. Again,
right.
It's a family that has gone through tragedy after tragedy. But this one, as opposed to really tearing the family apart, has also back together.
I have a question. In that final shot, are there 7 people again?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there are, because you have in that final shot, there's actually one more shot after that, which I want to get into, but one of the final shots is so it's Luke, it's Theodora, it's her cool Asian girlfriend who's sweet, There is Steven. There is Steven's wife, and then there's the two. Then there's Shirley and her husband. So there are seven. There are seven people. So it's like that. This magic number, the strength number of seven, is finally reunited. So here's why I think it kind of overcomes that level of bittersweet and goes into straight happy ending. Because so finally we have some dissonance. We're gonna disagree and argue about stuff. Cap, look at me.
I'm
gonna fight you.
Fight me.
Okay. Here's why I think it's a happy ending. Because to me, the whole driving force of the show is this character's relationship with death and how it's kind of reflecting into their lives, and they're unable to really function through their lives because of the early exposures they've had with death. And I think this show has such an interesting introspective to the relationship that we have with death, in that it takes it from not a bad thing, not even a bittersweet thing, but to something that should be celebrated. We have Nell, who in life was struggling to be heard, seen, and empowered, and in death is all of that. She's finally empowered. She saves her family. They finally hear her. They finally listen to her, and they finally see her. And I think for her, that's the perfect kind of journey for her. For Hugh, we have this character who struggled so hard to do the right thing by his children, to make sure that they're loved and cared for, by sacrificing the relationship that he's had in their lives. And through the ending, he's able to reveal his truth to Stephen, the person that was probably most fractured for, but also be able to ensure the safety of his children by getting them out of the house, and being able to stay with Nell and live in the house. And for Steve, he finally sees, right? Like, he finally has something to believe in. He finally has something to witness, and he finally sees a ghost. And the ghost to him is not just about memories or guilt or shame. It's about the love that he experiences with his family, and being able to know that they're not, it's not empty, and it's not alone anymore. And it's not something that he can deny, because he sees the evidence of it. And and Luke finally has the appropriate connection support from his family. They get him out of there. We see his 2 years. Theodora is able to finally overcome the walls that she has put in front of people because of Nell, because of the way that she was able to save them from that place. Shirley is finally able to overcome her anger at we kind of learned throughout that her anger is not only pointed towards her family, towards death, towards this relationship they've had with them, but it's actually pointed at herself, right? She's angry at herself for the way that she's treated her husband, her family, and everything. And so for me, it's such an interesting and introspective into death, where it makes death not a scary thing, but a happy thing and something to be celebrated, that I think it kind of transcends bittersweet and goes into the happiness and into a happy ending. And when Steve leaves the house, he sees, we see behind him, following him, the ghosts of the tens and dozens of people who are trapped in Hill House, almost asking him to keep their secret so that they can still keep living. So even though death might be scary, might be malevolent, might be evil, but the spirits inside of it and the relationship that they have with it is something to be celebrated, because they can live on. And the last words of the series are, there's this famous line of the anyone who walked there walked alone, but he changes it in the very last line to anyone who walked there walked together. And it lets us know that death isn't something we have to overcome by ourselves. It's something that people have gone through before, and it's something that shouldn't be scary, but something that should be accepted. And so to me, that's the cool, man. I went on a tirade. So you got, hey, reactions, go.
Yeah, I definitely like your take on it a whole lot. It definitely makes the ending feel more hopeful too.
Sure.
Yeah, the idea of the phrase celebration of death in particular, because I think what we also see in the ending is a celebration of life.
Yes.
And that all of these characters have been kind of trying to prevent themselves from living. You know,
Yeah.
they've put up barriers, they've put up obstacles, you know, in one form or another. So for all of them to now kind of have a second chance at living right. I forget, is Steven's wife pregnant at the end?
Yes.
Yes, she is.
So there you go. There's another instance of literal.
I think if you look closely, Theodora's girlfriend and she have wedding rings on.
Oh, really? I have to look at that again. That's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these little ways where they have now, you know, supposed to letting this shared trauma hold them back from living a fulfilling life. Okay, so there were a few things that I was also thinking that I think warrant some discussion. Firstly, the score is one of my favorites in any kind of. Yeah. And I think there are some really great quote unquote horror scores out there, where it not only can help in terms of scares and such, you know, that tension and stuff, but also in terms of, you know, that have an emotional kind of core, and that's something that I think the score of this show really is exemplified. I think it does a really great job of having that morose, melancholy kind of feeling, but also that there's a kind of love there. It's one of the few scores for a TV show that I've purchased. I have on CD, and I almost bought it on vinyl. I don't remember what stopped me from buying it on vinyl, but maybe it did.
Probably the price, honestly.
I don't know if it's the fact that it's just on my brain, but it reminded me of the Dexter score a little bit. Not like the down, but those like really introspective moments where Dexter have, where it's just that piano that gives that very Dexter sound to it. It definitely gives me that vibe.
Yeah, it's definitely similar instrumentation.
Yes,
which I think works really well for both in terms of, again, kind of highlighting that emotional support and bringing the feels. A lot of times, scores are described as, you know, kind of being the true emotion to things, and I think a show like this, that's something where the emotions front and center, and really just further supported by the score. The other thing that I wanted to talk about are those ghosts.
To watch it again for that reason.
Those damn goats.
Those goats. Were you aware when you were watching for the first time of the existence of the ghosts? Did you find out?
So the first time I watched it, like midway through, I was like, I learned that there were ghosts kind of hidden in the background, and I feel like I saw some of them, but this time around, I was on the lookout. I was like, where are the ghosts? And there were many times I had to stop and be like, hey, Nicole, ready? Look at that little doorway at the bottom of the stairs to the right in the background. As it pulls out, guess what? Ghost. And she got in on the act too. There, so in the one shot episode, the Two Storms episode, which is just, by the way, we have to talk about that because that episode is incredible. And there's the one shot, the very first nonstop one shot where Hugh walks through the funeral parlor and it turns into Hill House as he's walking, right? Like the first time I saw that, I had chills because at the time this came out, one shots were really popular. We had like Birdman, which is poo, but we had Birdman and we had Gravity and Alfonso Cuarón was doing all these long takes, and then Inuartu was like, I'm gonna do Alfonso Cuarón did it, steal it from him, and then Moonlight had these long takes and we were having these really long takes and the one shots were becoming popular. But I remember this one being so special because you had that physical walkthrough of one set to another that was clearly built in for that sole purpose, right? And so watching that, it's so much more effective because it brings you into another world as the character's experiencing it. But during that episode, during one of the one shots, Nicole noticed that one of the statues is staring at Hugh as he walks by, and then he goes to, or no, it's Liv, and then she goes to check a room, and the kid with the wheelchair rolls out, and then she follows the wheelchair, and when she turns back, the statue has his head straight again. So it's like even the statues are moving inside the house that we didn't even notice.
That's
so cool.
But yeah, when we watched it for the first time, it was a similar thing. I had like up on my phone some website that had all of them. So whenever we would get to the end of a scene, I'd pause it, and she'd be like, "Oh, what did I miss?"
Yeah.
But so much of the fun of the show was watching it, and there were a few that I caught that I saw while it was happening, and it's the kind of thing that when it gets you every time. It's almost like a weird little, like, you feel like you're getting a sixth sense.
Yeah.
And it's such an effective thing because it adds so much more tension.
Yeah.
It's the kind of idea where like they could show up at any point.
Yep.
And it's something that helps to keep you engaged with watching the show and not just paying attention to our characters' dialogue, but on the entire setting.
Right.
Where, some of them are fairly apparent, and some of them are very, very hidden and shrouded.
Yeah, we were watching the recap, and there were a couple like that they had pointed out, and I was like, did these people have like the contrast all the way up or something?
Yeah.
How did they see these ghosts? Like, one of them was like behind Olivia in like the pitch darkness.
Yeah, well, I finished my rewatch today, like in the bright white light of the morning, and I was like, I can barely see anything. So if there's any ghosts, I'm not catching them.
But what an effective kind of technique there.
Yes.
For not only adding proper atmosphere,
sure.
it serves the story, it serves the setting, but also in terms of just adding some cool, ghastly and scary moments.
And he does the same thing in Bly Manor too. You can see the plague doctor like all over in the background and stuff, and the different kind of ghosts that are stuck there.
Hill House ghost.
What'd you say?
Who's your favorite Hill House ghost?
My favorite Hill House ghost? Oh man, that's a good question. Favorite Hill House ghost is definitely the guy that Shirley bangs. He's just so handsome. Fun fact, one of the main reasons I was able to get Nicole to watch this was because she loves One Tree Hill, and James Lafferty is in One Tree Hill. He's one of the main characters, and he's the guy that Shirley bangs. So I was like, he's in it. Like, yo, James Lafferty's it. You gotta watch it, right? So he's my favorite because it got her to watch it.
Practically the same show.
Yeah, it's the same show. Ooh, that's a good what happened to him after what happened to him after James Lafferty leaving the town of One Tree Hill behind, went on to bang Shirley Crain. And that's just all it is.
My favorite ghost has always been the tall guy with the bowler hat.
Yeah, he's so creepy. Like, in actuality, it's probably him because he's so scary.
Yeah.
He's just I was gonna say him as well. He's just very foreboding, like in terms of just appearance and when he appears.
So as a fun little connection, back in October of, I guess, 2021, Dez and I went on our honeymoon, almost a year and a half after we got married. And
thanks, COVID.
Yeah, thanks, COVID. But we went to Orlando. We did this Universal, so we got the Holiday Horror Nights, and one of the huge draws was that they had a haunted house,
right,
at Universal. So we booked it. Like, as soon as we got in, we were like, we're doing Hill House first. And when you walk in, it's kind of a slightly shrunken down, because obviously it can't be the full size. But
right.
Outer facade of the house, which is so cool. But the whole time it was like, where's my dude?
Yeah.
Tall dude with the bowler hat, and he popped up a few times. It was I felt like we ended up having to go through way faster than I would have liked to, because there were so many cool Easter eggs and callbacks to the show. The whole time they had audio clips playing, the dialogue and the music, and
there were not a whole lot of jump scares, which I thought was kind of nice. And I know there were only very limited like actors.
Right, yeah.
I think like the only real people were like Poppy.
There were a few Poppies.
Poppy. The only thing I like about Poppy is her bagels. I do not enjoy what she did to this poor family. But But yeah, so this has been awesome. I think we're kind of wrapping up now, but I think I want to end with just saying that, you know, we started out with this wanting to do a take on Mike Flanagan and just as a director, but as the more we talked about it, the more we kind of realized that we had such a connection to all of his works that we thought it'd be cool to not limit ourselves and just kind of go one at a time. So expect more Mike Flanagan themed episodes in the future. But today I feel like we tackled what I think probably is his masterpiece, is his magnum opus. The writing, the direction, and the acting, the overall production of this show has been something really special. And it's something that I think resonates with a lot of people as they struggle in their own lives to deal with their relationships with their families and their relationships with death. So I want to thank both of the Capitanios for being here today. Thank you guys so much. Give you a round of applause.
Thank you for having us.
Always fun chatting with you.
And thank you, Nightmare Nerd, for tuning in to Nightmare Network. We will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in to Season 2 of Nightmare Network. Remember to like and subscribe and follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for updates regarding all things terrifying. Is there a movie or TV series you want us to talk about on our podcast? DM us and let us know. Remember, here at Nightmare Network, you share your scares.